So over this past summer, I turned my son's room into a train. His train has a fully functional motorized door, and it has a control panel where he can stop and will play a personalized recorded message.
The next stop is Grandpa and Grandma's house.
It's got dance party lights, and of course, it's got 2 floors because what kid doesn't like sleeping up in the air? I'm Brogan Pratt, and I like to build cool stuff. By day, I build robots. I teach people how to build robots. And apparently, over the summers, now I teach people how to build functional wooden trains. And today I'd like to show you all the different cool things that I've packed in here, how I went about designing it, how I went about building it, and then how you might go about doing this for yourself. So let's go take a deeper dive. In the design process, the first thing that I had to do is I had to go out and do a full CAD. So I went to my computer, I lopped it out in computer design, and I started modeling out where should everything go, what sizes should everything be, and so on and so forth, so that I can create my own build of materials and be able to know when I actually start going to the carpentry tools, what kind of pieces I'm going to need to be able to put this all together and print out some drawings so I can do this pretty easy. Once the CAD was done, it was time to start building. I had to start with taking apart all of the wallpaper. Then I had to put in a bit of a primer over that. Then we started actually doing some assembly. At this point, my father had come out, and that was a really cool experience for me because in the past, I had always been the one following my father's lead on these builds, and now he was able to kind of be on the flip side where I was giving him the plans and he was able to follow along. So we started building through this. Once the main kind of rough end was done, we had to do more priming again, and then more spachtelputzing of the walls, and then we started priming the actual piece. Now at this point, my mother showed up. She had done all the artwork inside of my previous rooms, and she was able to help me out with doing some of the painting here as well, which was great. Then moved on to starting to do some of the basic electronics, doing some of the 3D modeling. And then my son, of course, was able to come out to a local hardware store to help pick out some of the old pieces. So one thing to know about this train that's special is that my family and I live in the Netherlands. We moved here a couple of years ago, and they have a public train system in here called NS. And this is a version of what they call their intercity or their direct trains. This is not a direct reconstruction. It's technically a second-class train. Yeah, I know, we are not the fancy citizens world. But he is allowed to, of course, bring his Loopfiets, his Strider bike inside. And it is kid class, at least, so only kids are allowed to be inside this room. Taking a closer look at the electronics, on the right-hand side of the door is the actual servo motor that pulls the door along. When we come inside to look at the CAD, if I remove these 3D printed shells, you can see there's got a servo motor there. And on the left-hand side of this now, there's a little touch sensor that's able to actuate so we know when the door is closed and when it's open. The servo motor itself is just driving a simple sprocket, and then this sprocket is driving standard bike chain. Up on the left-hand side, it's a little chain drive with a little touch sensor up in the back here. So I know when it is that it's been actuated and when it hasn't. There is a toggle that actually knows when the door is going to be open and closed. That's that main kind of L shape. There's also another sprocket that you can see. This is just an idler for the chain. And then there's that little blue kind of knob, and that's a rotary encoder. And that rotary encoder is really important because it allows me to keep track of the speed at which I'm going. And the reason I need to keep track of the speed is because, well, so I'm imagining that I'm a child here. I have put my head in between the door here, and this is obviously going to be a major problem. But thankfully, because I can know how fast the door is going, if it's ever moving slower than its expected speed, the door will stop and back up quickly so that it doesn't crush any child's head. To take a closer look at the open and close button, this is something that I 3D modeled out in my CAD software. This button is intended to look the same as the buttons on the front of the trains. So whenever you push it, of course it makes a rainbow pattern running around. Whenever it stops, it locks into a new full color ring that loops around. On the inside of the train is a secondary control panel. Again, this is 2 little touch sensors inside. So whenever I push on this, it opens up a little limit switch and allows the door to open up behind it. Because the train's no good if you're only able to get in and out of it on one side. When we're looking at the RGB Dance party up above in the roof, there is, on his control panel, there are 2 buttons, or 2 little rotary control dials here. They're called rotary encoders, and effectively inside here is a little spinning mechanism that when I spin and twist this, and rotate this one around, This causes the RGB LEDs above to cycle through. So you can see that this about 150 neopixel strip is able to cycle through and have a bit of a dance party. Now there's a second knob on his control panel here, and the second knob corresponds to this map up on his wall. And this map is effectively, like if you've ever been on trains or subways or metros, there's usually some sort of train map. And up on this train map, there are a bunch of different neopixels that I've added in over the years. So as I rotate this little piece around, eventually if I decide to stop on one, what's going to happen is...
Next stop, Uncle Romy's house.
Up over to the left, I've got a Sonos speaker that's connected to my home automation system. And then whenever he stops at one, the microcontroller will connect to my Raspberry Pi that's running my home auto backend. It'll play a specific song that all of the specific family members have linked out. So for instance, let's go to Grandma and Grandpa's house.
The next stop is Grandpa and Grandma's house in Canada.
And then their names will scroll up across the screen to let him know where it is that he's staying at. Whose house are we going to go to?
Auntie Jenny.
Okay.
I'm trying to go to it.
Mm-hmm.
There, and Auntie Jenny.
If you come down and look at the rest of the control panel, there's a whole bunch of different switches. The rest of these switches are non-functional, but they are a lot of fun to flick and different dials to play with so that it feels like he's able to be driving around his train control panel. Inside this control panel is where a lot of this magic happens. Over here in this corner, I've got the actual main microcontroller running most of this. This is running on a Adafruit Metro board or Metro Express. It's basically a Python programmable Arduino. Down here I've got my main mean-well power supply. I want to make sure this thing was nice and safe and not going to blow up. And then it runs its main power out through there. And of course all this jumble of wiring is all hidden inside, so I'm not too worried or concerned about that. And this is where all the main electronics are going. Looking up at his ceiling, his room lights are also automated. So if I double click on his button, it'll start cycling through in a dance party scene. So one of my favorite other automations I have set up in here is that in the morning, kids like to get out of their bed way too early for when they're allowed. And of course, when you're 4, you don't know your numbers too well. So what I've done is just set these lights up. When it's nighttime, these lights will be red. And then in the morning, when it's time for him to wake up, they turn bright green to let him know that if the lights are green, I'm allowed to go out of my room. Another thing he's got access to is this little button here. It's a little IKEA button. When he presses the play button, it contacts the home automation system. And down in the bottom, on his Sonos speaker,
based on the railway series,
it starts to play an episode of the Thomas the Train stories to help him go to sleep at night. And then with that Thomas story button, the one thing I have had to change is that after 8 p.m., he's no longer allowed to listen to those Thomas stories because he will just continue to cycle through and he will forever listen to those until it's midnight and he's finally not actually going to sleep. As well, when it's time to get up and go to preschool for the day, those Thomas stories will also not play after a certain hour. And of course, no room's complete without a sick Hot Wheels track. I hope this was a good showcase of what kind of things you can do with all these different skills. And it really doesn't take a ton of knowledge. It takes a little bit of carpentry skills, takes a little bit of computer-aided design, CAD skills, takes a little bit of robotic skills, but all these kind of skills are things that you can learn how to do to be able to make cool things like this. So I hope you learned something today, and I'll see you in the next project.